The judge looked at my daughter and her husband across the courtroom, and I watched her expression shift from polite neutrality to something considerably colder. "Mr. Calloway," she said, addressing the lawyer, "your clients are claiming your client's father lacks the cognitive capacity to manage his own finances. Is that correct?" The lawyer adjusted his tie. "That's correct, Your Honor." And yet, she flipped through the documents in front of her. "Mr. Calloway, this assessment was conducted by a physician your clients personally referred. A physician who, I note, submitted his report 11 days after a single 40-minute consultation." She looked up. "Does that seem adequate to you?" The courtroom was quiet. My own lawyer, a sharp woman named Elaine Forsyth, who'd been practicing family law in Halifax for over 30 years, sat perfectly still beside me. She'd told me not to react to anything. I was trying. My daughter stood up without being asked. "Your Honor, my father has been making decisions that are clearly not in his best interest. He's been—" "Sit down, please." The judge's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'll ask the questions." My daughter sat. Her husband nodded and put a hand on her arm. She shook it off. The judge turned to me directly. "Mr. Calloway, Mr. Firth, I should say. I apologize." She glanced at the documents again. "Mr. Firth, in your own words, what happened after your cardiac event in February?" "I'd been waiting for this. I had a minor heart attack on February 14th, I said. "I was alone in the house. I called 911 myself, drove myself partway to the hospital before the paramedics reached me on the highway, and was admitted to the QEIE. I was there for 6 days. My daughter and her husband were in Costa Rica at the time." "Did they return when they learned of your hospitalization?" "No, Your Honor, they did not." The judge looked at my daughter. "Is that accurate?" The pause that followed lasted long enough that Elaine touched my arm lightly under the table. "Don't fill the silence. Let them fill it." My daughter's voice was controlled when it came. "Our flights were non-refundable. We had a resort package, and the doctors told us he was stable." "The doctors told you," the judge repeated. "So you were in contact with his medical team while he was in the ICU." "It wasn't the ICU. He was in a cardiac monitoring unit following a myocardial infarction. You were informed, and you chose to remain on vacation." The judge made a note. "Mr. Firth, how long had you been providing financial support to your daughter and her husband prior to this incident?" I took a breath. 4 years, beginning when Nonan's business ran into difficulties. I helped them with their mortgage, their house in Bedford, which I co-signed for. Monthly support payments of $4,000. I paid off a line of credit they'd accumulated, approximately $38,000, and I covered their vehicle payments, 2 vehicles, roughly $940 a month combined. And the total over 4 years, your approximation. My accountant calculated $212,000, including the line of credit payoff. The number sat in the room like something heavy. "And your daughter is now petitioning this court to declare you financially incompetent because," the judge checked the document, "because you have abruptly altered your estate planning in ways that suggest cognitive decline." She set the paper down. "Mr. Firth, what did you change in your estate planning?" "I removed my daughter as sole beneficiary. I established a trust for my granddaughter Piper. I updated the executor to my brother." "That's it?" "That's it." The judge looked at my daughter's lawyer for a long moment. "Counsel, I'll be direct with you. This petition is denied. Your client's father demonstrated no cognitive deficiency in this proceeding or in any of the documentation submitted by his own physicians. What he demonstrated is that he made a financial decision his daughter disagreed with. Those are not the same thing." She folded her hands. "Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Firth full costs in defending this application. I'm setting that at $9,000, payable within 45 days. And I want to be clear, the medical report submitted by the petitioner's referred physician would be flagged to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Nova Scotia. The adequacy of that assessment is, in my view, a matter for professional review." My daughter made a sound I couldn't quite categorize. Her lawyer touched her shoulder. "This matter is concluded." The gavel. Elaine walked me out to the parking lot on Hollis Street. The March air was cold and wet, that particular Halifax cold that gets into your joints. They'll have 45 days for the costs, she said. If they don't pay, we pursue collection. Liens, garnishment, you have options. They won't pay in 45 days? She smiled slightly. No, probably not. I got into my car, sat for a moment before starting the engine. My phone showed 14 missed calls, all from the same number. I didn't listen to the voicemails in the parking lot. I drove home first, to the house in Dartmouth I'd lived in for 22 years. The house I'd raised her in after her mother passed. The house I'd refinished the basement of and repainted twice and kept through a pension and careful savings and 40 years of working for a marine survey company. I made a pot of tea. Then I sat at the kitchen table and pressed play. The first message was measured. Dad, call me. We need to talk about what happened today. This is not over. The second was less measured. I cannot believe you would do this to your own family. Do you understand what you've done? Nolan is sick over this. I'm sick over this. Call me. By the fifth message, the measure quality was completely gone. By the eighth, she was crying. But the crying had a particular texture to it, fury underneath it, not grief. The 14th was the shortest. You're going to regret this. I promise you that. I saved them all to a folder on my laptop. Elaine had advised me to document everything. My phone buzzed again while I was still at the table. Not my daughter this time, my granddaughter Piper. She was 13, sharp as a tack, and had my late wife's tendency to say exactly what she was thinking without warming up to it first. Grandpa, Mom is really upset. I know, sweetheart. She's been on the phone since you guys got home from wherever you were. What happened? Your mom and I had a disagreement about some grown-up things. It's between us. Silence. Then she said you're trying to take the house. I'm not trying to take anything. I promise you that. Okay. Another pause. Are you okay, like actually? I told about February. The chest tightening on the drive to work, pulling over on the 102. The paramedics, the hospital, the 6 days in the cardiac unit with a view of the Bedford Basin. The text from my daughter that said, doctors say you're stable. Hope you feel better soon. Flights are non-refundable. I'm fine, Piper. I'm right here. Can I come over on the weekend? You said you'd teach me cribbage. Saturday. Come for lunch. I'll make chowder. After we hung up, I sat with my tea for a long time. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. No calls from my daughter. No calls from Nolan. Elaine updated me periodically. The 45-day clock was running, and from what she could determine through legal channels, their financial situation had not improved. It turned out that the $4,000 a month had been doing more work than I'd realized. Without it, the mortgage payments on the Bedford house had fallen behind by the second month. Nolan's business, a renovation contracting company he'd been running at a loss for 3 years while I covered the household gap, had lost its largest client. He'd laid off his 2 employees. My daughter, who worked part-time at a wealth management firm in downtown Halifax, had apparently had an altercation with a senior colleague and was placed on administrative leave. I learned most of this from Piper, who reported these developments with the detached precision of a journalist. Mom got put on leave, she said one Saturday in April, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with a bowl of chowder, watching me shuffle the crib board. She says it's political. Dad says it's because she yelled at someone. How are you doing with all of it? I'm fine. I mostly stay in my room. She picked up her cards. Dad said something weird the other night, though. What did he say? He said you were right to cut them off. Mom got really mad. They argued for like 2 hours. I looked at my cards without really seeing them. Is Nolan okay? She thought about it. He looks tired. Like the kind of tired that doesn't go away after sleeping. I knew that kind of tired. Piper, none of what's happening between your parents and me is your fault. Not even a little bit. I know. She laid down a card. 15-2. In May, my daughter called. Not to yell, the tone was different. Careful. Controlled in the way that suggested she practiced it. I want to meet, she said. Just the 2 of us, somewhere neutral. I agreed. We met at the cafe in Dartmouth Crossing on a Tuesday afternoon. I arrived first, ordered the coffee, and sat by the window watching the parking lot until I saw her pull in with the old Civic, not the Acura. The Acura Piper had mentioned had been repossessed in April. She looked like she'd aged 6 months in two. She sat down, wrapped both hands around her tea, and didn't say anything for a moment. I let her take her time. "I'm not going to ask for money," she said finally. "I want you to know that going in." "Okay." She stopped. "Dad, I need you to understand something. I know what we did in February was wrong. I knew it at the time. I told myself it was okay because you were stable, because the doctors said so. Because she shook her head. There wasn't a good reason. I just didn't want to lose the trip. I didn't want to lose the deposit. And I told myself that made it okay, and it didn't." I watched her, the daughter who'd come first in her math class 3 years running, who'd given a eulogy at her mother's funeral at 16 that had made the priest cry, who somewhere along the way had let someone else's priorities become her own until she stopped recognizing the difference. "Why now?" I asked. "Because Nolan told me last week that he's been thinking about what you did, cutting the support, and he said it was the right thing. And I lost it. Completely. Screamed at him for an hour." She looked at the table, and then I couldn't sleep, and I sat in the kitchen at 2 in the morning thinking about it, and I thought, if Nolan can say that, and he's the one who actually lost the most money here, then what is my excuse for not being able to say it? Quiet between us. Outside, a light rain had started against the window. "I was your father lying in a cardiac unit," I said. "Not angry, just saying the fact of it. Alone. 6 days. She flinched. "I know. I'm not telling you that to hurt you. I'm telling you because I need you to understand why I did what I did. Not just the estate changes, all of it. The support stopping, the will. I didn't do those things out of spite. I did them because I understood finally that I had spent 4 years buying a version of our relationship that wasn't real." She looked up. Her eyes were wet. "I loved giving you things," I said. "I want to be honest about that. It made me feel useful after your mother died. It made me feel like I was still doing something for you. But at some point I stopped being your father and started being a line item in your budget. And I don't know when that happened. I just know that lying in that hospital bed was the first time I understood it clearly." The cafe was quiet around us. Someone at the counter ordered a muffin. Rain against the glass. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today," my daughter said. "I don't think I've earned that. No, not today. But I want to try. However long that takes, whatever that looks like." I studied her face. The last few months had stripped something away, the particular gloss of a life maintained by someone else's money. What was left looked more like the girl I'd raised. "Nolan," I said, "where's his head at? He's been working 14-hour days, trying to salvage the business. Dad, he told me last month that he was ashamed, not of losing the money, of how they treated you. He actually used the word ashamed." That landed somewhere in my chest. "The house," I said. "You're behind on the mortgage." 3 months. We're trying to work it out with the bank. "I'm not going to catch up the mortgage for you. I want to be clear about that." She nodded immediately. "I know, I'm not asking." "But Piper." I folded my hands on the table. "Whatever happens with the house, with the business, with any of it, Piper's education doesn't get touched. I've set up a direct trust. Nothing goes through you or Nolan. It goes straight to her. That was always going to happen regardless of any of this." My daughter pressed her lips together. When she spoke, her voice was tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. That's not a gift to you. That's something I'm doing for my granddaughter." We sat for another 20 minutes. We didn't resolve anything. We didn't hug when we left. She walked to the Civic and I walked to my car, and I sat in the parking lot for a while before driving home. The $9,000 came. Eventually, partially. Nolan sent Elaine a check for $6,000 in late May with a note that said the remaining $3,000 would come in 60 days. It did, 2 weeks early. Elaine called to tell me, and she sounded mildly surprised. That's not nothing, she said. No, I agreed. It's not. The Bedford house sold in June. Not for what they'd hoped. The market had softened, and they'd listed too high initially. But it sold, and they cleared their debts, and Nolan put a deposit on a 2-bedroom apartment in Clayton Park. My daughter called to tell me herself rather than letting me find out from Piper. That was something. I heard through Piper that Jennifer, my daughter's closest friend who had been a fixture in their lives throughout all of this, had apparently ended the friendship. The reason, according to Piper, was that Jennifer had told my daughter she was finally seeing what everyone else already saw. This seemed to have hit harder than the house or the money or any of it. I didn't say anything about that. Some things you don't need to comment on. One Thursday evening in July, my doorbell rang. I'd been out in the driveway working on the boat motor, a 2003 Evinrude I'd been restoring for 2 summers, the kind of stubborn project that goes from frustrating to meditative somewhere around the 2nd year. My neighbor Clive had declared it hopeless in April, which had only made me more determined. I came inside wiping my hands on a shop rag and found my daughter on the step. Nolan was in the driveway with Piper, who was attempting to interest him in a badminton set she'd apparently brought from the car. "Hi," my daughter said. "Hi." Piper wanted to come by, and Nolan, he wanted to say something. "If that's okay." I looked past her at Nolan. He was watching me with an expression I recognized from the rare occasions I'd seen him genuinely uncomfortable. None of the defensive bluster, none of the performance. Just a man standing in a driveway holding a badminton racket he didn't know what to do with. I stepped aside. "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." Piper ran up the steps and hugged me in the particular physical way of 13-year-olds who haven't yet decided that's embarrassing. I hugged her back. Nolan came to the door last. We shook hands. His grip was different. Not the confident squeeze of 4 years of taking my money without much acknowledgement. Something more careful. "Mr. Firth," he said, "I owe you an apology. Not a general one. A specific one." He glanced at my daughter briefly, then back at me. "When you were in hospital in February, I knew we should go back. I knew it. And I talked myself out of it, and I talked your daughter into staying. That was me. She's taken more of the blame in this than she deserved for that particular thing. I hadn't expected that. I've been ashamed of it since about a week after it happened," he said. "And I didn't say anything because saying something would mean doing something about everything else, and I wasn't ready to do that. So, that's the honest version." I looked at him for a long moment. The Nolan I'd known for 9 years had a smooth answer for everything. This version had no answer at all, just the statement. And then he stood there and let it be. "Come inside," I said. "I mean it. Tea's on." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd listened to the voicemails in March, where Piper had beaten me at crib twice running, where I'd eaten alone 6 nights a week for most of the last 4 years. Nolan talked about the business. He picked up a new client in Sackville, a commercial retrofit job that would keep him busy through fall. He'd stopped trying to scale up and started trying to do good work in a smaller radius. He seemed lighter. My daughter didn't say much. She held her tea and watched me and Nolan talk, and once she reached over and squeezed Nolan's arm and he put his hand over hers and didn't say anything. Piper asked if she could see the boat motor. "It's in pieces," I told her. "Even better," she said. We went out to the driveway. I showed her the carburetor, the fuel lines, the manifold I'd resealed the week before. She asked better questions than most adults. After a while, Nolan crouched down beside us and started asking questions too, and my daughter sat on the porch step with her tea and watched the 3 of us with an expression I couldn't quite name. When they left, the summer light was long and gold the way it gets in Halifax in July, the kind of evening that's almost too good to be believed. Piper hugged me on the step. Nolan shook my hand again, the same careful grip as before. "Same time next week?" Piper asked. "Saturday," I said. "Bring your crib board." I stood in the driveway after they drove away and looked at the boat motor. 2 summers in. Closer than I'd been. Not there yet. That was all right. Some things were worth doing slowly. The whale stayed the same. Piper's trust stayed in place. Elaine stayed on retainer. Those weren't punishments, they were just the accurate shape of where things stood. My daughter called more regularly now, sometimes just to talk. which was something we hadn't done in years, maybe since before her mother died, if I'm being honest with myself. We talked about small things, a book she'd read, an issue at her new job, what Piper had said at school. She didn't ask about money. I didn't offer. There was damage between us that hadn't healed and might not, fully. I knew that. Elaine had said something to me once, during one of our early meetings back in March, that had stayed with me. The goal of this process isn't to punish, it's to establish what's real. I'd written it down. I wasn't sure why at the time. I understood it better now. What was real was this. I had a daughter who had made terrible choices and was working to become a person who wouldn't make them again. I had a son-in-law who had the uncommon decency to say, specifically and without being asked, what he'd actually done wrong. I had a granddaughter who beat me at crib and asked smart questions about carburetors. And I had a 2003 Evinrude in my driveway that was almost ready to run. On a Saturday in August, Piper was at the kitchen table doing homework when I heard the engine catch for the first time. It idled rough, then smooth. I stood in the driveway with my hands at my sides and listened to it run. Clive came out of his house across the street and stood there with his arms crossed. "Impossible," he called over. "Apparently not," I called back. I went inside to tell Piper. She came running out in her socks, stood next to me in the driveway listening. "Grandpa," she said, "you actually did it." I put my arm around her shoulders. 67 years old, standing in a Dartmouth driveway listening to a rebuilt engine run, with my granddaughter in socks on the pavement beside me. Some mornings you can see exactly what you nearly let slip away. Those are the mornings worth keeping. I keep thinking about what Elaine said to me back in March, sitting in her office on Hollis Street with the harbor grey outside the window. The goal of this process isn't to punish, it's to establish what's real. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope and carried it in my jacket pocket for weeks without fully understanding why. I understand it now. What happened between me and my daughter didn't start with a heart attack. It started years before, quietly, the way these things always do, with a small accommodation here, a financial arrangement there, a gradual blurring of the line between being a generous father and being a resource with a pulse. I let that happen. I want to be honest about that. I told myself it was love, and some of it was, but some of it was easier than the harder conversation, the one where you say, "This has to change," and mean it. There's a kind of wisdom that doesn't come from reading or being told. It comes from lying in a cardiac unit alone at night and doing the arithmetic of who showed up and who didn't. That's where I learned the difference between people who love you and people who love the life you provide them. I don't say that bitterly. I say it as a plain fact I'd been avoiding for a long time. What Nolan did, standing in my doorway in July and saying, specifically, what he had actually done wrong, that took something real. Not intelligence in the academic sense, but the harder kind. The ability to look clearly at yourself without flinching away from what you see. Most people can't do it. I couldn't always do it either. It's easier to build a story where the other person is the problem. Nolan stopped building that story, and it cost him something to do it. That matters. And Piper, 13 years old, sitting across from me at my kitchen table asking if I was okay, like actually. She didn't learn that from nowhere. That kind of moral instinct. The impulse to check on someone because it's the right thing and not because there's anything in it for you, that gets cultivated quietly over years, and then one day you see it in a kid and you understand that something went right somewhere along the way. The boat motor runs now. I stood in my driveway in August and listened to it idle and thought about what it had taken. 2 summers, a lot of wrong diagnoses, a neighbor who told me it was impossible, and enough stubbornness to keep going past the point where quitting would have been reasonable. That's not a metaphor I planned, it's just what was true at the same time. I'm 67. My daughter and I are rebuilding something slowly, without a blueprint, without any guarantee of how it turns out. That's the honest version of what reconciliation looks like. Not a single conversation that fixes everything, not forgiveness handed over like a gift, just 2 people deciding to keep showing up, week after week, and seeing what grows. Piper beat me at crib again last Saturday. She's been keeping a running tally since spring. She showed me 17 wins to my 9. I told her I was letting her win. She looked at me with her grandmother's eyes and said absolutely nothing.